The Duellist. Book 1. By Charles Churchill. The clock struck 12, over half the globe. Darkness had spread her pitchy robe. Morpheus, his feet with velvet shod, treading as if in fear he trod, gentle as dews at eventide, distilled his poppies far and wide. Ambition, who, when waking, dreams of mighty but fantastic schemes, who, when asleep, never knows that rest, with which the humbler soul is blessed, was building castles in the air, goodly to look upon, and fair, but on a bad foundation laid, doomed at return of morn to fade. Pale study, by the taper's light, wearing away the watch of night, sat reading, but, with overcharged head, remembered nothing that he read. Starving midst plenty, with a face, which might the court of famine grace, ragged, and filthy to behold, grey avarice nodded over his gold. Jealousy, his quick eye half closed, with watchings worn, reluctant dozed, and, mean distrust not quite forgot, slumbered as if he slumbered not. Stretched at his length on the bare ground, his hardy offspring sleeping round, snored restless labor, by his side, lay health, a coarse but comely bride. Virtue, without the doctor's aid, in the soft arms of sleep was laid, whilst vice, within the guilty breast, could not be physicked into rest. Thou bloody man, whose ruffian knife is drawn against thy neighbor's life, and never scruples to descend into the bosom of a friend, a firm, fast friend, by vice allied, and to thy secret service tied, in whom 10 murders breed no awe, if properly secured from law, thou man of lust, whom passion fires to foulest deeds, whose hot desires over honest bars with ease make way, whilst idiot beauty falls a prey, and to indulge thy brutal flame, a Lucrece must be brought to shame, who dost, a brave, bold sinner, bear rank incest to the open air, and rapes, full blown upon thy crown, enough to weigh a nation down, thou similar of lust. Vain man, whose restless thoughts still form the plan of guilt, which, withered to the root, thy lifeless nerves can't execute, whilst in thy marrowless, dry bones, desire without enjoyment groans, thou perjured wretch, whom falsehood clothes, even like a garment, who with oaths dost trifle, as with brokers, meant to serve thy every vile intent, in the day's broad and searching eye, making God witness to a lie, blaspheming heaven and earth for pelf, and hanging friends to save thyself, thou son of chance, whose glorious soul, on the 4 aces doomed to roll, was never yet with honor caught, nor on poor virtue lost one thought, who dost thy wife, thy children set, thy all, upon a single bet, risking the desperate stake to try, here and hereafter on a die, who, thy own private fortune lost, dost game on at thy country's cost, and, grown expert in sharping rules, first fooled thyself, now preys on fools, thou noble gamester, whose high place gives too much credit to disgrace, who, with the motion of a die, dost make a mighty island fly, the sums, I mean, of good French gold, for which a mighty island sold. Who dost betray intelligence, abuse the dearest confidence, and, private fortune to create, most falsely play the game of state, who dost within the alley sport sums which might beggar a whole court, and make us bankrupts all, if care, with good Earl Talbot, was not there, thou daring infidel, whom pride and sin have drawn from reason's side, who, fearing his avengeful rod, dost wish not to believe a God, whose hope is founded on a plan, which should distract the soul of man, and make him curse his abject birth, whose hope is, once returned to earth, there to lie down, for worms a feast, to rot and perish like a beast, who dost, of punishment afraid, and by thy crimes a coward made, to every generous soul a curse, than hell and all her torments worse, when crawling to thy latter end, call on destruction as a friend, choosing to crumble into dust, rather than rise, though rise you must, thou hypocrite, who dost profane, and take the patriot's name in vain, then most thy country's foe, when most of love and loyalty you boast, who, for the love of filthy gold, thy friend, thy king, thy goddess sold, and, mocking the just claim of hell, were bidders found, thyself wouldst sell, ye villains, of whatever name, whatever rank, to whom the claim of hell is certain, on whose lids that worm, which never dies, forbids sweet sleep to fall. Come, and behold, whilst envy makes your blood run cold, behold, by pitiless conscience led, so justice wills, that holy bed, where peace her full dominion keeps, and innocence with Holland sleeps. Bid terror, posting on the wind, affray the spirits of mankind, bid earthquakes, heaving for a vent, rive their concealing continent, and, forcing an untimely birth, through the vast bowels of the earth, endeavor, in her monstrous womb, at once all nature to entomb, bid all that's horrible and dire, all that man hates and fears, conspire, to make night hideous as they can. Still is thy sleep, thou virtuous man. Pure as the thoughts which in thy breast inhabit, and ensure thy rest, still shall thy eye-cliff, taught, though late, thy friendly justice in his fate, turn to a guardian angel, spread sweet dreams of comfort round thy head. Dark was the night, by fate decreed, for the contrivance of a deed, more black than common, which might make this land from her foundations shake, might tear up freedom by the root, destroy a Wilkes, and fix a Butte. Deep horror held her wide domain, the sky in sullen drops of rain, forewept the morn, and through the air, which, opening, laid its bosom bare, loud thunders rolled, and lightning streamed, the owl at freedom's window screamed, the screech owl, prophet dire, whose breath brings sickness, and whose note is death, the churchyard teemed, and from the tomb, all sad and silent, through the gloom, the ghosts of men, in former times, whose public virtues were their crimes. Indignant stalked, sorrow and rage, blanked their pale cheeks, in his own age, the prop of freedom, Hampden there, felt after death the generous care, Sidney by grief from heaven was kept, and for his brother patriot wept, all friends of liberty, when fate prepared to shorten Wilkes's date, heaved, deeply hurt, the heartfelt groan, and knew that wound to be their own. Hail, liberty! A glorious word, in other countries scarcely heard, or heard but as a thing of course, without, or energy, or force, here felt, enjoyed, adored, she springs, far, far beyond the reach of kings, fresh blooming from our mother earth, with pride and joy she owns her birth, derived from us, and in return, bids in our breasts her genius burn, bids us with all those blessings live, which liberty alone can give, or nobly with that spirit die, which makes death more than victory. Hail, those old patriots, on whose tongue persuasion in the Senate hung, whilst they the sacred cause maintained. Hail, those old chiefs, to honor trained, who spread, when other methods failed, war's bloody banner, and prevailed. Shall men like these unmentioned sleep, promiscuous with the common heap, and, gratitude forbid the crime, be carried down the stream of time, in shoals, unnoticed and forgot, on Lethe's stream, like flags, to rot? No, they shall live, and each fair name, recorded in the book of fame, founded on honor's basis, fast, as the round earth to ages last. Some virtues vanish with our breath, virtue like this lives after death. Old Time himself, his scythe thrown by, himself lost in eternity, an everlasting crown shall twine, to make a Wilkes and Sidney join. But should some slave-got villain dare, chains for his country to prepare, and, by his birth to slavery broke, make her, too, feel the galling yoke, may he be evermore accursed, amongst bad men be ranked the worst, may he be still himself, and still, go on in vice, and perfect ill, may his broad crimes each day increase, till he can't live, nor die in peace, may he be plunged so deep in shame, that Satan mayn't endure his name, and here, scarce crawling on the earth, his children curse him for their birth, may liberty, beyond the grave, ordain him to be still a slave, grant him what here he most requires, and damn him with his own desires. But should some villain, in support, and zeal for a despairing court, placing in craft his confidence, and making honor a pretense, to do a deed of deepest shame, whilst filthy lucre is his aim, should such a wretch, with sword or knife, contrive to practice against the life of one who, honored through the land, for freedom made a glorious stand, whose chief, perhaps his only crime, is, if plain truth at such a time, may dare her sentiments to tell, that he his country loves too well, may he but words are all too weak, the feelings of my heart to speak, may he owe for a noble curse, which might his very marrow pierce. The general contempt engage, and be the Martin of his age. The Duellist. Book 2. By Charles Churchill. Deep in the bosom of a wood, out of the road, a temple stood, ancient, and much the worse for wear, it called aloud for quick repair, and, tottering from side to side, menaced destruction far and wide, nor able seemed, unless made stronger, to hold out 4 or 5 years longer. 400 pillars, from the ground, rising in order, most unsound, some rotten to the heart, aloof, seemed to support the tottering roof, but, to inspection nearer laid, instead of giving, wanted aid. The structure, rare and curious, made, by men most famous in their trade, a work of years, admired by all, was suffered into dust to fall, or, just to make it hang together, and keep off the effects of weather, was patched and patched from time to time, by wretches, whom it were a crime which art would treason hold, to mention with those names of old. Builders, who had the pile surveyed, and those not flit crofts in their trade, doubted, the wise hand in a doubt, merely, sometimes, to hand her out, whether, like churches in a brief, taught wisely to obtain relief, through chancery, who gives her fees, to this and other charities, it must not, in all parts unsound, be ripped, and pulled down to the ground, whether, though after ages never, shall raise a building to compare, art, if they should their art employ, meant to preserve, might not destroy, as human bodies, worn away, battered and hasting to decay, bidding the power of art despair, cannot those very medicines bear, which, and which only, can restore, and make them healthy as before. To liberty, whose gracious smile shed peace and plenty over the isle, our grateful ancestors, her plain, but faithful children, raised this fane. Full in the front, stretched out in length, where nature put forth all her strength, in spring eternal, lay a plain, where our brave fathers used to train their sons to arms, to teach the art of war, and steel the infant heart. Labor, their hardy nurse, when young, their joints had knit, their nerves had strung, abstinence, foe declared to death, had, from the time they first drew breath, the best of doctors, with plain food, kept pure the channel of their blood, health in their cheeks bade colour rise, and glory sparkled in their eyes. The instruments of husbandry, as in contempt, were all thrown by, and, flattering a manly pride, war's keener tools their place supplied. Their arrows to the head they drew, swift to the points their javelins flew, they grasped the sword, they shook the spear, their fathers felt a pleasing fear, and even courage, standing by, scarcely beheld with steady eye. Each stripling, lessoned by his sire, knew when to close, when to retire, when near at hand, when from afar, to fight, and was himself a war. Their wives, their mothers, all around, careless of order, on the ground, breathed forth to heaven the pious vow, and for a son's or husband's brow, with eager fingers, laurel wove. Laurel, which in the sacred grove, planted by liberty, they find. The brows of conquerors to bind, to give them pride and spirit, fit, to make a world in arms submit. What raptures did the bosom fire, of the young, rugged, peasant sire, when, from the toil of mimic fight, returning with return of night, he saw his babe resign the breast, and, smiling, stroke those arms in jest, with which hereafter he shall make the proudest heart in Gallia quake. Gods! With what joy, what honest pride, did each fond, wishing rustic bride, behold her manly swain return. How did her love-sick bosom burn, though on parades he was not bred, nor wore the livery of red, when, pleasure heightening all her charms, she strained her warrior in her arms, and begged, whilst love and glory fire, a son just like his sire. Such were the men in former times, ere luxury had made our crimes, our bitter punishment, who bore their terrors to a foreign shore. Such were the men, who, free from dread, by Edwards and by Henries led, spread, like a torrent swelled with rains, over haughty Gallia's trembling plains. Such were the men, when lust of power, to work him woe, in evil hour, debauched the tyrant from those ways, on which a king should found his praise, when stern oppression, hand in hand, with pride, stalked proudly through the land, when weeping justice was misled, from her fair course, and mercy dead. Such were the men, in virtue strong, who dared not see their country's wrong, who left the mattock and the spade, and, in the robes of war arrayed, in their rough arms, departing, took their helpless babes, and with a look, stern and determined, swore to see those babes no more, or see them free. Such were the men whom tyrant pride could never fasten to his side, by threats or bribes, who, freemen born, chains, though of gold, beheld with scorn, who, free from every servile awe, could never be divorced from law, from that broad general law, which sense made for the general defense, could never yield to partial ties, which from dependent stations rise, could never be to slavery led, for property was at their head. Such were the men, in days of yore, who, called by liberty, before her temple on the sacred green, in martial pastimes oft were seen, now seen no longer in their stead. To laziness and vermin bred, a race who, strangers to the cause of freedom, live by other laws, on other motives fight, a prey to interest, and slaves for pay. Valor how glorious, on a plan of honor founded, leads their van. Discretion, free from taint of fear, cool, but resolved, brings up their rear. discretion, valor's better half, dependence holds the general staff. In plain and homespun garb arrayed, not for vain show, but service made, in a green flourishing old age, not damned yet with an equipage, in rules of porterage untaught, simplicity, not worth a groat, 4 years had kept the temple door, full on his breast a glass he wore, through which his bosom open lay, to everyone who passed that way, now turned adrift, with humbler face, but prouder heart, his vacant place, corruption fills, and bears the key, no entrance now without a fee. With belly round, and full fat face, which on the house reflected grace, full of good fare, and honest glee, the steward hospitality, old welcome smiling by his side, a good old servant, often tried, and faithful found, who kept in view, his lady's fame and interest too, who made each heart with joy rebound, yet never ran her state aground, was turned off, or, which word I find, is more in modern use, resigned. Half starved, half starving others, bred, in beggary, with carrion fed, detested, and detesting all, made up of avarice and gall, boasting great thrift, yet wasting more, than ever steward did before, succeeded one, who, to engage, the praise of an exhausted age, assumed a name of high degree, and called himself economy. Within the temple, full in sight, where, without ceasing, day and night, the workman toiled, where labor bared, his brawny arm, where art prepared, in regular and even rows, her types, a printing press arose, each workman knew his task, and each, was honest and expert as leech. Hence learning struck a deeper root, and science brought forth riper fruit, hence loyalty received support, even when banished from the court, hence government gained strength, and hence, religion sought and found defense, hence England's fairest fame arose, and liberty subdued her foes. On a low, simple, turf-made throne, raised by allegiance, scarcely known, from her attendants, glad to be, pattern of that equality, she wished to all, so far as could, safely consist with social good, the goddess sat, around her head, a cheerful radiant glory spread, courage, a youth of royal race, love lily stern, possessed a place, on her left hand, and on her right, sat Honor, clothed with robes of light, before her Magna Charta lay, which some great lawyer, of his day, the Pratt, was officed to explain, and make the basis of her reign. Peace, crowned with olive, to her breast, 2 smiling twin-born infants pressed, at her feet, couching, war was laid, and with a brindled lion played, justice and mercy, hand in hand, joined guardians of the happy land, together held their mighty charge, and truth walked all about at large, health for the royal troop the feast, prepared, and virtue was high priest. Such was the fame our goddess bore, her temple such, in days of yore. What changes ruthless time presents! Behold her ruined battlements, her walls decayed, her nodding spires, her altars broke, her dying fires, her name despised, her priests destroyed, her friends disgraced, her foes employed, herself, by ministerial arts, deprived even of the people's hearts, whilst they, to work her surer woe, feign her to monarchy a foe, exiled by grief, self-doomed to dwell, with some poor hermit in a cell, or, that retirement tedious grown, if she walks forth, she walks unknown, hooted, and pointed at with scorn, as one in some strange country born. Behold a rude and ruffian race. A band of spoilers seize her place, with looks which might the heart deceit, and make life sound a quick retreat. To rapine from the cradle bred, a staunch old bloodhound at their head, who, free from virtue and from awe, knew none but the bad part of law, they roved at large, each on his breast, marked with a greyhound stood confessed, controlment waited on their nod, high-wielding persecution's rod, confusion followed at their heels, and a cast statesman held the seals, those seals, for which he dear shall pay, when awful justice takes her day. The printers saw they saw and fled, science, declining, hung her head. Property in despair appeared, and for her self-destruction feared, whilst underfoot the rude slaves trod, the works of men, and word of God, whilst, close behind, on many a book, in which he never deigns to look, which he did not, nay, could not read, a bold, bad man, by power decreed, for that bad end, who in the dark, scorned to do mischief, set his mark, in the full day, the mark of hell, and on the gospel stamped an L. Liberty fled, her friends withdrew, her friends, a faithful, chosen few, honor in grief threw up, and shame, clothing herself with honor's name, usurped his station, on the throne, which liberty once called her own. Gods! That such mighty ills should spring, under so great, so good a king, so loved, so loving, through the arts, of statesmen, cursed with wicked hearts. For every darker purpose fit, behold in triumph statecraft sit. The Duellist. Book 3. By Charles Churchill. Me. What mighty perils wait the man who meddles with a state, whether to strengthen or oppose. False are his friends, and firm his foes. How must his soul, once ventured in, plunge blindly on from sin to sin? What toils he suffers, what disgrace, to get, and then to keep, a place? How often, whether wrong or right, must he in jest or earnest fight, risking for those both life and limb, who would not risk one groat for him? Under the temple lay a cave, made by some guilty, coward slave, whose actions feared rebuke, a maze of intricate and winding ways, not to be found without a clue, one passage only, known to few, in paths direct led to a cell, where fraud in secret loved to dwell, with all her tools and slaves about her, nor feared lest honesty should rout her. In a dark corner, shunning sight of man, and shrinking from the light, one dull, dim taper through the cell, glimmering, to make more horrible the face of darkness, she prepares, working unseen, all kinds of snares, with curious, but destructive art. Here, through the eye to catch the heart, gay stars their tinsel beams afford, neat artifice to trap a lord. There, fit for all whom folly bred, wave plumes of feathers for the head, garters the hag contrives to make, which, as it seems, a babe might break, but which ambitious madmen feel, more firm and sure than chains of steel, which, slipped just underneath the knee, forbid a freeman to be free. Purses she knew, did ever curse, travel more sure than in a purse, which, by some strange and magic bands, enslave the soul, and tie the hands. Here flattery, eldest born of guile, weaves with rare skill the silken smile, the courtly cringe, the supple bow, the private squeeze, the levis vow, with which no strange or recent case, fools in, deceive fools out of place. Corruption, who, in former times, through fear or shame concealed her crimes, and what she did, contrived to do it, so that the public might not view it, presumptuous grown, unfit was held, for their dark counsels, and expelled, since in the day her business might be done as safe as in the night. Her eye down bending to the ground, planning some dark and deadly wound, holding a dagger, on which stood, all fresh and reeking, drops of blood, bearing a lantern, which of yore, by treason borrowed, Guy Fawkes bore, by which, since they improved in trade, excisemen have their lanterns made. Assassination, her whole mind, bloodthirsting, on her arm reclined, death, grinning, at her elbow stood, and held forth instruments of blood, vile instruments, which cowards choose, but men of honour dare not use. Around, his lordship and his grace, both qualified for such a place, with many a Forbes, and many a Dun, each a resolved, and pious son, wait her high bidding, each prepared, as she around her orders shared, proof against remorse, to run, to fly, and bid the destined victim die, posting on villainy black wing, whether he patriot is, or king. Oppression, willing to appear, an object of our love, not fear, or, at the most, a reverend awe, to breed, usurp the garb of law. A book she held, on which her eyes were deeply fixed, whence seemed to rise joy in her breast, a book, of might, most wonderful, which black to white, could turn, and without help of laws, could make the worse the better cause. She read, by flattering hopes deceived, she wished, and what she wished, believed, to make that book for ever stand, the rule of wrong through all the land. On the back, fair and worthy note, at large was Magna Charta wrote, but turn your eye within, and read, a bitter lesson, Norton's creed. Ready, even with a look, to run, fast as the coursers of the sun, to worry virtue, at her hand, two half-starved greyhounds took their stand. A curious model, cut in wood, of a most ancient castle stood, full in her view, the gates were barred, and soldiers on the watch kept guard. In the front, openly, in black, was wrote, the Tower, but on the back, marked with a secretary's seal, in bloody letters, the Bastille. Around a table, fully bent, on mischief of most black intent, deeply determined that their reign might longer last, to work the bane of one firm patriot, whose heart, tied to honour, all their power defied, and brought those actions into light they wished to have concealed in night. Begot, born, bred to infamy, a privy council sat of three, great were their names, of high repute, and favour through the land of Bute. The first, entitled to the place of honour both by gown and grace, who never let occasion slip, to take right hand of fellowship, and was so proud, that should he meet the 12 apostles in the street, he'd turn his nose up at them all, and shove his Savior from the wall. Who was so mean, meanness and pride, still go together side by side, that he would cringe, and creep, be civil, and hold a stirrup for the devil, if in a journey to his mind, he'd let him mount and ride behind. Who basely fawned through all his life, for patrons first, then for a wife, wrote dedications which must make the heart of every Christian quake, made one man equal to, or more, than God, then left him, as before, his God he left, and, drawn by pride, shifted about to t'other side, was by his sire a parson made, merely to give the boy a trade, but he himself was thereto drawn, by some faint omens of the lawn, and on the truly Christian plan, to make himself a gentleman, a title in which form arrayed him, though fate never thought on when she made him. The oaths he took, 'tis very true, but took them as all wise men do, with an intent, if things should turn, rather to temporize, than burn. Gospel and loyalty were made, to serve the purposes of trade. Religions are but paper ties, which bind the fool, but which the wise, such idle notions far above, draw on and off, just like a glove. All gods, all kings, let his great aim be answered, were to him the same. A curate first, he read, and laid in, whilst he should have fed the souls of his neglected flock, of reading such a mighty stock, that he overcharged the weary brain, with more than she could well contain, more than she was with spirits fraught, to turn and methodize to thought, and which, like ill-digested food, to humours turned, and not to blood. Brought up to London, from the plough and pulpit, how to make a bow, he tried to learn, he grew polite, and was the poet's parasite. With wits conversing, and wits then, were to be found amongst noblemen, he caught, or would have caught, the flame, and would be nothing, or the same. He drank with drunkards, lived with sinners, herded with infidels for dinners, with such an emphasis and grace, blasphemed, that Potter, 11, kept not pace. He, in the highest reign of noon, bawled bawdy songs to a psalm tune, lived with men infamous and vile, trucked his salvation for a smile, to catch their humour caught their plan, and laughed at God to laugh with man, praised them, when living, in each breath, and damned their memories after death. To prove his faith, which all admit, is at least equal to his wit, and make himself a man of note, he in defence of Scripture wrote, so long he wrote, and long about it, that even believers began to doubt it. He wrote, too, of the inward light, though no one knew how he came by it, and of that influencing grace, which in his life never found a place. He wrote, too, of the Holy Ghost, of whom no more than doth a post he knew, nor, should an angel show him, would he, or know, or choose to know him. Next, for he knew, twixt every science, there was a natural alliance, he wrote, to advance his Maker's praise, comments on rhymes, and notes on plays, and with an all-sufficient air, placed himself in the critic's chair, usurped over reason full dominion, and governed merely by opinion. At length dethroned, and kept in awe, by one plain simple man of law, he armed dead friends, to vengeance true, to abuse the man they never knew. Examine strictly all mankind, most characters are mixed, we find, and vice and virtue take their turn, in the same breast to beat and burn. Our priest was an exception here, nor did one spark of grace appear, not one dull, dim spark in his soul. Vice, glorious vice, possessed the whole, and, in her service truly warm, he was in sin most uniform. Injurious satire. Own at least one snivelling virtue in the priest, one snivelling virtue which is placed, they say, in or about the waist, called chastity. The prudish dame knows it at large by virtue's name. To this his wife, and in these days, wives seldom without reason praise, bears evidence then calls her child, and swears that Tom was vastly wild. Ripened by a long course of years, he great and perfect now appears. In shape scarce of the human kind, a man, without a manly mind, no husband, though his truly wed, though on his knees a child is bred. No father, injured, without end, a foe, and though obliged, no friend, a heart, which virtue never disgraced, a head, where learning runs to waste, a gentleman well bred, if breeding rests in the article of reading, a man of this world, for the next, was never included in his text, a judge of genius, though confessed, with not one spark of genius blessed, amongst the first of critics placed, though free from every taint of taste, a Christian without faith or works, as he would be a Turk amongst Turks, a great divine, as lords agree, without the least divinity, to crown all, in declining age, inflamed with church and party rage, behold him, full and perfect quite, a false saint, and true hypocrite. Next sat a lawyer, often tried, in perilous extremes, when pride and power, all wild and trembling, stood, nor dared to tempt the raging flood. This bold, bad man arose to view, and gave his hand to help them through, steeled against compassion, as they passed. He saw poor freedom breathe her last. He saw her struggle, heard her groan. He saw her helpless and alone, whelmed in that storm, which, feared and praised, by slaves less bold, himself had raised. Bred to the law, he from the first, of all bad lawyers was the worst. Perfection, for bad men maintain, in ill we may perfection gain, in others is a work of time, and they creep on from crime to crime. He, for a prodigy designed, to spread amazement over mankind, started full ripened all at once, a perfect knave, and perfect dunce. Who will, for him, may boast of sense, his better guard is impudence, his front, with tenfold plates of brass, secured, shame never yet could pass, nor on the surface of his skin, blush for that guilt which dwelt within. How often, in contempt of laws, to sound the bottom of a cause, to search out every rotten part, and worm into its very heart, hath he taken briefs on false pretense, and undertaken the defense, of trusting fools, whom in the end, he meant to ruin, not defend. How often, even in open court, hath the wretch made his shame his sport, and laughed off, with a villain's ease, throwing up briefs, and keeping fees. Such things as, though to roguery bred, had struck a little villain dead. Causes, whatever their import, he undertakes, to serve a court, for he by art this rule had got, power can effect what law cannot. Fools he forgives, but rogues he fears. If genius, yoked with worth, appears, his weak soul sickens at the sight, and strives to plunge them down in night. So loud he talks, so very loud, he is an angel with the crowd, whilst he makes justice hang her head, and judges turn from pale to red. Bid all that nature, on a plan, most intimate, makes dear to man, all that with grand and general ties, binds good and bad, the fool and wise, knock at his heart, they knock in vain, no entrance there such suitors gain. Bid kneeling kings forsake the throne, bid at his feet his country groan, bid liberty stretch out her hands, religion plead her stronger bands. Bid parents, children, wife, and friends, if they come thwart his private ends, unmoved he hears the general call, and bravely tramples on them all. Who will, for him, may cant and whine, and let weak conscience with her line chalk out their ways. Such starving rules are only fit for coward fools, fellows who credit what priests tell, and tremble at the thoughts of hell. His spirit dares contend with grace, and meets damnation face to face. Such was our lawyer, by his side, in all bad qualities allied, in all bad counsels, sat a third, by birth a lord. Oh, sacred word! Oh, word most sacred! Whence men get a privilege to run in debt, whence they at large exemption claim, from satire, and her servant shame, whence they, deprived of all her force, forbid bold truth to hold her course. Consult his person, dress, and air, he seems, which strangers well might swear, the master, or, by courtesy, the captain of a colliery. Look at his visage, and agree, half hang he seems, just from the tree, escaped, a rope may sometimes break, or men be cut down by mistake. He hath not virtue, in the school, of vice bred up, to live by rule, nor hath he sense, which none can doubt, who know the man, to live without. His life is a continued scene, of all that's infamous and mean, he knows not change, unless, grown nice, and delicate, from vice to vice, nature designed him, in a rage, to be the Wharton of his age, but, having given all the sin, forgot to put the virtues in. To run a horse, to make a match, to revel deep, to roar a catch, to knock a tottering watchman down, to sweat a woman of the town, by fits to keep the peace, or break it, in turn to give a pox, or take it, he is, in faith, most excellent, and, in the word's most full intent, a true choice spirit, we admit, with wits a fool, with fools a wit, hear him but talk, and you would swear, obscenity herself was there, and that profaneness had made choice, by way of trump, to use his voice, that, in all mean and low things great, he had been bred at Billingsgate, and that, ascending to the earth, before the season of his birth, blasphemy, making way and room, had marked him in his mother's womb. Too honest, for the worst of men, in forms are honest, now and then, not to have, in the usual way, his bills sent in, too great to pay, too proud to speak to, if he meets, the honest tradesman whom he cheats, too infamous to have a friend, too bad for bad men to commend, or good to name, beneath whose weight earth groans, who hath been spared by fate, only to show, on mercy's plan, how far and long God bears with man. Such were the three, who, mocking sleep, at midnight sat, in council deep, plotting destruction against a head, whose wisdom could not be misled, plotting destruction against a heart, which never from honor would depart. Is he not ranked amongst our foes? Hath not his spirit dared oppose our dearest measures, made our name stand forward on the roll of shame? Hath he not won the vulgar tribes by scorning menaces and bribes, and proving that his darling cause is, of their liberties and laws, to stand the champion? In a word, nor need one argument be heard, beyond this to awake our zeal, to quicken our resolves, and steel our steady souls to bloody bent, sure ruin to each dear intent, each flattering hope, he, without fear, hath dared to make the truth appear. They said, and, by resentment taught, each on revenge employed his thought, each, bent on mischief, racked his brain, to her full stretch, but racked in vain. Scheme after scheme they brought to view, all were examined, none would do, when fraud, with pleasure in her face, forth issued from her hiding place, and at the table where they meet, first having blessed them, took her seat. No trifling cause, my darling boys, your present thoughts and cares employs, no common snare, no random blow, can work the bane of such a foe, by nature cautious as his brave, to honor only his a slave, in that weak part without defense, we must to honor make pretense, that law shall to his ruin draw, the wretch, who stands secure in law. Nor think that I have idly planned, this full ripe scheme, behold at hand, with 3 months training on his head, an instrument, whom I have bred, born of these bowels, far from sight, of virtue's false but glaring light, my youngest born, my dearest joy, most like myself, my darling boy. He, never touched with vile remorse, resolved and crafty in his course, shall work our ends, complete our schemes, most mine, when most he honors seems, nor can be found, at home, abroad, so firm and full a slave of fraud. She said, and from each envious son, a discontented murmur run, around the table, all in place, thought his full praise their own disgrace, wondering what stranger she had got, who had one vice that they had not, when straight the portals open flew, and, clad in armor, to their view, Martin, the duellist, came forth. All knew, and all confessed his worth, all justified, with smiles arrayed, the happy choice their dam had made. Thanks for watching the channel. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. Or if you would like to support the channel, please visit the link in the description to visit our Patreon page. Like the pictures in the video? Visit the link in the description to see more. Thanks again for watching.